Jaya Radha Madhava Punya Vihari. Hare Krishna. I'd like to welcome all the guests for this very interesting conversation on the topic of reading Srila Prabhupada's books, its importance for our personal spiritual life and for ISKCON as a society. Today, I feel very delighted to have with us as a guest a very inspiring personality who has been a scholar, a scientist, and author of several books, and has been a disciple of Srila Prabhupada. I welcome His Grace Drutakarma. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhu, thank you for joining us today. With your permission, I'd like to offer our obeisances to Srila Prabhupada. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Adi Gaur Bhaktavrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I also like to offer my obeisances to you, Prabhu. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha, kripa sindhubhyevacha, patitanam pamnebhyo, vaishnavibhyo namo namaha. Prabhu, we feel delighted on behalf of the Ministry of Education that you're able to give us the time today. Prabhu, when was the first time that you came in touch with Srila Prabhupada's books?
The first time I came in touch with Srila Prabhupada's books was in 1973 when I met some devotees. I didn't know they were devotees, but they were distributing Bhagavad Gita as it is at a rock concert in the United States. And I gave them a donation, and they gave me a copy of Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita as it is. And during the concert, I was looking at the paintings in the book, and I saw the painting in the original Macmillan Bhagavad Gita of a man standing in the middle of some stairs, and going up was Radha and Krishna at the top, and down the stairs led to
the rock concert.
Hellish planets. Yeah, to where I was going. So that painting really inspired me, to take the book very seriously. And I took it home and I read it. And then, I didn't at that time know about the Hare Krishna movement.
Were you studying at that time, Prabhu? Were you studying or working? What was your life situation then?
I had been studying, and I wasn't in the university at that time. I was working at that time, not a very elevated job, but I was working. And I took the book, and it said on the inside of the cover, it said, if you're interested in the subject matter of this book, write to the secretary in Los Angeles. And I did that, and they sent me catalogs, and I ordered more books, including the Srimad Bhagavatam and others. And I also got a subscription to Srila Prabhupada's tape ministry, so I heard his lectures. And gradually I found out that there were temples, there were centers where you could go and hear more instruction about the books like Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. So I did that.
That's quite an immersion in Srila Prabhupada's instructions right away. Prabhu, was there a background to all of this? What piqued your interest in Krishna consciousness or the writings of Srila Prabhupada besides the picture that you described?
Well, that may have something to do with the fact that I was raised in a military family. My father was an intelligence officer in the United States Air Force. And that meant a couple of things for me as I was growing up. One thing it meant was we were traveling. Our family would move to a different place every 3 or 4 years. And some of the places were outside the United States. And that way I got exposed to a lot of different worldviews and cultures. And the one that attracted me most was the Vedic culture of ancient India, the spiritual culture. So I was a little bit interested in that type of philosophy. And there are many books that claim to be authentic translations of Vedic literatures, but you get no clue of what practically to do. So when I encountered Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita as it is, it gave me something practical to do. There was a whole movement that was based on living the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. So that's what I found very amazing, that it wasn't just a philosophy in a book, but that it was the inspiration for a whole movement where you have communities of people actually living the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita.
Before you came in touch with Bhagavad Gita, did you read other Vedic books?
Yes, I did. One summer when I was at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., I worked with a program, a social welfare program. And during that time, I was reading a Bhagavad Gita translation by someone else. And I really didn't understand it. I couldn't get anything out of it. I'd always heard of this book, Bhagavad Gita, but yes, I had read translations of the Upanishads. I had read translations of the Gita. I had read other books of Vedic philosophy, but Srila Prabhupada's books were quite different. They immediately spoke to me.
Obviously, in your case, you being modest in a sense that not only had you read, but you read quite a bit, given what you just described to us in terms of the breadth of literature which you'd read with respect to the Vedic tradition and philosophy. You earlier mentioned that Srila Prabhupada's books gave a practical approach. The movement offered you an ability to live the life. But from the very first time that you read Srila Prabhupada's books, the Bhagavad Gita as it is, and you mentioned how the picture sort of impressed you quite a bit. Is there anything that you remember from the written context which stood apart or different from the other books that you were reading? Something that you still remember and carry in your heart?
Let me see. When I got the Srimad Bhagavatam, I was very impressed with the sages who were meeting at Naimisharanya. To me, that was fascinating. The accounts of the different sages who were speaking this philosophy in conversations that took place thousands or even longer periods of years ago. So I really found that fascinating, the story of Shukadeva Goswami, coming into the assembly of sages who were gathered at the time of Maharaj Parikshit's fast until death on the banks of the Ganges or Yamuna. That I found that fascinating, that the philosophy was being presented by these great personalities who were thinking consciously about the welfare of the entire human society. I thought that was really fascinating. And other books of philosophy that I read are very, they just present some dry ideas and you have no conception of the personality behind it. So I really was struck by this personal presentation of the philosophy in the books like Srimad Bhagavatam, and also that there was a personal voice, Srila Prabhupada's voice, speaking and communicating this knowledge. This was very striking to me, that there was this personal aspect to the whole presentation that he made.
As a person of science, this idea that one could live millions of years ago, when the world was going on millions of years ago already, notions like this, were they easy to accept, or did they challenge the mindset that you were probably carrying until that point in time?
I was open to new ideas. I had already seen that many ideas that I had were being contradicted by events. I had a certain understanding of the position of the United States in the world, but I saw that many times the activities that the nation was carrying out were not of the highest moral quality, that I could see. Originally, I went to the university to become involved in one of the intelligence services with diplomatic service. And after some time, I could see that if anything that I did in along those lines through the government agencies, I would have to be taking the side of the United States, my country, right or wrong. And I was looking for something more universal, more truly international. And I found that in the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, as it was presented by Srila Prabhupada, and in the philosophy of the Srimad Bhagavatam. There I found a philosophy that rose above nationalism, racism, all kinds of false identifications. And it focused on the conscious self, the Atma, and I thought, and the Paramatma, the supreme conscious self. And that was something to me that was truly universal and transcended these narrow boundaries of this kind of ism or that kind of ism.
You clearly were a very broad thinker, even at that time and at a very young age, I presume.
Yeah, I was in my early 20s when I encountered Srila Prabhupada's books. And I had thought about these things quite a bit. But so the point was that I was already questioning many things. And when Srila Prabhupada in his books started questioning the theories of the current scientific theories of the origin of life, the history of the human race, and things like that, I wasn't so resistant to it because I had seen other things that I used to accept exposed as being false in one way or another. So that it was just one more thing. And yes, it was something I never heard from any of my teachers in school or university, this idea that humans have always existed in this world because, and to me, it's not such a strange idea that the Vedic literature talks about these things, human civilizations, human populations existing millions and millions, even billions of years ago. It's not surprising to me when we consider that, according to the Vedic teachings, this universe has a purpose, and it's to enable Atmas, Jiva souls, conscious individual personal beings in the world of matter to realize their full spiritual potential and rise to a platform beyond birth and death in a life of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. And that is achieved in the human form of life. So if that's the purpose of the universe, is to allow that development, then I think the facility for it, namely the human form of life, should always have been here. So
absolutely,
that's an idea that comes from Srila Prabhupada's presentation of the Srimad Bhagavatam and other Vedic literatures.
A very revolutionary idea, even in the middle of a revolution, I must say. Prabhu, yeah. Did you eventually join the temple? And if yes, how long were you reading Srila Prabhupada's books on your own before you joined the temple? And what was the contribution of those books for you to join full-time?
I had been reading the books for over a year before I joined a temple. Of course, I didn't join immediately. When I learned about the existence of temples, I decided to visit the ones near me. I was living in upstate New York at the time. So the two temples that were nearest to me were Buffalo and New York. And actually, I got on the mailing list of both temples, and I used to get invitations to different festivals. But somehow or other, because of maybe the postage rate was very low, the invitations would always reach me after the festival had taken place. But once I got an invitation to Ratha Yatra at the Buffalo, New York temple, and I went to it. And the devotees were very kind and they received me nicely. And I could see that they were living the teachings of the books I had been reading. And that was very impressive to me because in my life as a student and after my studies, I would meet many people who would talk about this philosophy or that philosophy, and I would speak with them. And we never dreamed of actually living the philosophy. It was just some interesting ideas. But I could see these people, they are actually living the philosophy. They are walking the talk, as is sometimes said. So then that became an option for me. It was something I could consider. Well, this is something I could possibly do. I didn't decide immediately to do it, but it became an option for me. And then after some time, I decided, well, I think I would like to live the philosophy in one of those centers. So I went to the Washington, D.C. temple, which at that time was not outside the city as it is today. It was in the middle of the city near DuPont Circle in Washington. So I went to that temple and joined and have remained in the Krishna consciousness movement ever since.
That's some good, almost 47 years, I believe. Prabhu, when you joined the temple, were there others who had such a strong interest as your good self in reading Prabhupada's books? Were there others in Washington temple?
Well, one thing that happened early in my devotional life at the temple was I wanted to spend some time studying the books. And I had a very full schedule. When you're a new bhakta, a new devotee in an ISKCON temple during that time period, you would have a lot to do in terms of mostly cleaning, which is very good, cleaning the temple floor, cleaning the kitchen floor. Everything in the temple should be clean. So there's a lot of cleaning work to do, and generally it was assigned to the newer devotees. Of course, we would also go out chanting on chanting parties, Sankirtan parties, chanting. We would learn to distribute books and things like that. But I felt I wanted some more time to actually deeply study the books. So the temple president at that time, his name was Damodar Prabhu. He was one of the original devotees in New York City in Srila Prabhupada's first temple on 2nd Avenue in New York City. So he was the temple president at that time, and he was a bit of an intellectual himself. So I asked him, can I have some time to study? And he gave me 2 hours a day to study the books. So I did that. And I had the idea that eventually I would like to do some writing myself as a service to Krishna. And eventually, Krishna arranged for that to happen.
Did you receive any um, personal instructions from Srila Prabhupada in the context of his books and your writings, Prabhu?
Well, actually, the answer to that is on one level, no. When I joined the Hare Krishna movement, and well, when I moved into the temple, at least, it was 1974. And at that time, Srila Prabhupada already had a couple thousand disciples. And I could see over the first couple of years that I was in the movement that I was fortunate to be able to see Srila Prabhupada a few times and hear him give lectures. But when it was time to go on a walk or go to his room, it would be the senior devotees who would go, and a junior devotee like me wouldn't be part of that. So I understood sort of from the beginning. Srila Prabhupada had given some instructions. I'd heard him say and read in his books that the spiritual master exists in two forms, as Vani and Vapu. So Srila Prabhupada said, of the two, the Vani, or the instruction, is more important than the Vapu, or the physical form, because the physical form eventually won't be there, but the Vani, the instruction, is forever. So I understood, even when Srila Prabhupada was here, that my main association with him was going to be through his Vani, his books. And he often said, I am present in my books. So I've always accepted that. And that's one reason why I read Srila Prabhupada's books every day. I regard it as my opportunity to associate personally with Srila Prabhupada. I actually do feel his presence in his books. I feel it's like I'm having a private conversation with him as I deeply study his words that he left, and to be consulted for 10,000 years or more. So I think that opportunity is there, and that's why it's a very fixed part of my sadhana that I read every single day, from Srila Prabhupada's books. I read some other books as well, but every day, without fail, I read from Srila Prabhupada's books. And in that way, I've gone through them, the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the Bhagavad Gita. Over the years, I've gone through them many, many times. And each time I go through them, there's something new to inspire and instruct me. So I don't feel any lack of an opportunity to commune, to associate with my spiritual master. He accepted me as his disciple, but it was in a letter that he wrote to
Very inspiring to hear these words from you, Prabhu. If I may ask a slightly offensive question, uh, you've 47, 48 years and you're reading every day. You just mentioned you've gone through many a time. Some devotees say they get bored. Do you not get bored of reading the same words again? I'm asking you because it's a question that's presented by some devotees that they do not feel the interest or inspiration to move forward, especially if they've read. Could you please, from your wonderful realizations, share some inspiration, some impetus, give us some impetus in this regard?
Well, I suppose one could say the same thing about the Hare Krishna mantra. Okay, I've chanted it. Let's have a new mantra. What I just have found from my practical experience is that not only is Srila Prabhupada present in his books, but by appreciating his presence, one can also appreciate the presence of the personalities, including the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who are also present in his books, such as Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is described as the literary incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now, I think even Srila Prabhupada said that not everyone is going to be a scholar and a reader of books. If you're not, he said, you chant Hare Krishna, chant Hare Krishna and dance. Of course, everyone should do that anyways. That's our Yuga Dharma. But so if someone isn't attracted to studying the books and they find that difficult, they should do some other type of devotional activity. If instead of reading Srila Prabhupada's books, one is going to read all kinds of materialistic literature, then I think that is going to not be so good for someone's advancement in Krishna consciousness. To me, it's always been a mystery, why some people aren't attracted to this amazing literature, this amazing contribution. One of my services early in my devotional career was I was an assistant treasurer, and I would take the collections of the devotees who were going out distributing books. They would bring them to my office, and I would collect it and put it away. And sometimes I would have the latest volume of Srimad Bhagavatam that had just arrived. Now, in the early days of the movement, we didn't have Srila Prabhupada's entire Srimad Bhagavatam. We had the first canto, the second canto, and then a volume of the third canto would be printed. Some copies would come to the temple. I was always very eager to get a copy of a new volume of Srila Prabhupada's translation of Bhagavad Gita when it came out. And I would see sometimes that I would have that book on my desk, and then someone would come in, and a devotee, and they would see the book, and they would look past it and they see a newspaper that I'd looked at and thrown in the trash, and they'd pull that out of the trash can too. So I think, as I said, I look at it as an opportunity to associate with Srila Prabhupada, to associate with the personalities who are mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam, to absorb my mind in that. And each time I read it, each time I go through it, I always find something new, because I've changed in terms of my realization and understandings. And it's just, it doesn't seem hackneyed. It doesn't seem, to me anyways, that it's repetitive or boring. I and I know there are many others who have similar feelings and are attracted in the same way to those books. So
even without our asking, actually, you have kindly described what should be our mood when we approach the books, and what really we can draw in terms of nectar, if I may use that phrase, a daily dose of nectar by reading every day. Very inspiring, and this is precisely the reason we are conducting this project called Books Are the Basis, where we can encourage each other to read Srila Prabhupada's books every day. You mentioned how you feel in commune with Srila Prabhupada, the various personalities that are mentioned in Bhagavatam till this day, and every time when you read, you find something new, a newer and newer realization. Clearly, these realizations that you collected in your heart would have inspired you to write. When did your scholarly pursuit, especially in the context of writing, begin, Prabhu, and how did it begin?
I always had a desire to write, and I think it's something really from some past life. When I was very young, just 1 or 2 years old, my mother told me she would give me alphabet soup. It's a kind of soup that has noodles in the shapes of the letters of the alphabet. She said I wouldn't eat it. I would spell out words in the soup bowl. So I take it that I've always, from some past life, had some interest in doing that. But in this lifetime, it first manifested in keeping diaries and things like that. And then it was when I joined the Hare Krishna movement that I really began to try to pursue it as a service. I actually started by sending articles into Back to Godhead magazine, and I had, but they would always refuse them. They would say, "We can't print this." So, and then I'd send another one, and they'd reject it. And I'd send another article, and they would reject it. And then finally, one day, they called the temple I was in. I was in the Miami temple at that time. And they said, "We would like you to come to Los Angeles and join the staff of Back to Godhead magazine, because we would like you to be trained as a writer for the magazine." they said, we can see that you don't give up. You're very serious about it. So, I told the temple president about it, and he said, okay, if they want you to go and they're going to give you a ticket, you can go, after the Christmas marathon, the Prabhupada marathon for book distribution that takes place every year. So after the marathon, I went to Los Angeles, and the first assignments I got were very simple, to write the captions for the pictures in the magazine and make the table of contents and things like that. And it was at that time Satsvarupa Maharaj was the editor of the magazine, and after we completed each magazine, we would send it to Srila Prabhupada with a letter, that we had all signed. So that was some way for me to connect with Srila Prabhupada, by doing some service for the publication that he started. Before he came to the West, Srila Prabhupada, on his own, starting from, I think, 1944 or some year around that time, he started Back to Godhead magazine. He would write articles for it. He would publish it, print it all by himself with money that he had gotten from donations from various people. And then he would go out personally to the tea shops in New Delhi and other places to distribute his magazine, Back to Godhead. So when he came to the West, he turned the publication over to his disciples. So I always have felt some connection with Srila Prabhupada in that way, by being able to do some service in connection with that publication he started. And his spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, had always told him, if you get money, print books and print devotional literature and distribute it. That's the Brihat Mridanga. So I remember once I was in Delhi, I went to Old Delhi, and I went around to all of the places that are connected with Srila Prabhupada and his printing of his original first 3 volumes of the Srimad Bhagavatam. There are places there. There was the temple where he was staying in the old part of New Delhi. I think we have that temple now. He would stay there, and he would write the manuscripts for his translation of Bhagavad Gita. And then there were the printing shops where he would go to get the book printed, and the binding shops where he would get the books bound, and the paper shops where he would buy paper for the printing of his books. He personally did all these things. And when the books were printed, then he would take some from the printer and sell them in different places. So I very much was inspired by visiting those places and seeing the personal sacrifices that Srila Prabhupada made to get these books written and printed and distributed. He was doing that all by himself, of course, with Krishna's help. So
they say that behind every successful author, there is a history of many, many difficulties. And if we wouldn't have known that, as you described, that how many times you wrote to the BBT, the Back to Godhead magazine, and your articles were not accepted, and your service thereon. Prabhu, it's very clear that you've got a lot of inspiration from Srila Prabhupada's books, and you're living them as well. Prabhu, what do you say to managers within ISKCON who are busy in performing service, but they do not have time, or say that, reading of books will come later on? Any message for them, or from your experience, what happens if one is not in touch with Srila Prabhupada's books?
Well, we are living in the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, which was founded by Srila Prabhupada for a specific purpose. And that purpose, as he explained it, was, once he said our temples are bases, from which we go out to fight with the forces of the Kali Yuga. It's that was the purpose of his founding of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, and that means things have to be organized so as to facilitate the study of these books. Because Srila Prabhupada said, if the devotees are just going out and distributing my books and they don't know what's in them, then what's the use? If somebody asks, well, what's in these books? Or ask some other question and they can't answer because they haven't read them, then that's, to Srila Prabhupada, that wasn't very, very pleasing. So sometimes one can be intimidated by the number of books that Srila Prabhupada gave us. Srimad Bhagavatam, it's many, many volumes. Chaitanya Charitamrita, 13 volumes. So many other books. Sometimes it just seems like too much. But my practical experience is that if one reads just for a short time each day, maybe 10 pages a day, then after if you do that regularly, a little bit each day, you go through the entire Srimad Bhagavatam in about a year and a half. And then we have to ask ourselves, how long have we been in this movement? I've done that at temples sometimes, ask the devotees, how many years have you read who's read the entire Srimad Bhagavatam? Not many people. Then you ask, well, how many years have you been in the movement? 5, 6, 7. Now, you're just taking a little bit of time each day, read 10 pages, then you'll have gone through the entire Srimad Bhagavatam in 18 months to 2 years, I think. And that means you could have gone through it, if you've been here for 6 years, you could have gone through it 3 times by now.
Mhm.
And so actually, if you read a little bit each day, say like 10 pages or so a day of Srila Prabhupada's books, you can go through the entire Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, Nectar of Devotion, and Chaitanya Charitamrita in very few years, really. So it's and one will get a taste for it if one actually tries it. But as I said, there may be some people that they're not wired in that way. But I think even for managers, there are many lessons that can be learned by going through the Srimad Bhagavatam. And the main characters are, many of them, they're not sages, they're members of the royal order. They are kshatriyas who are responsible for organizing and leading societies, communities. So I think there are lessons to be learned by every category of devotee from the Srimad Bhagavatam, whether one is a manager or a preacher or a pujari or whatever one's service and position is, there is something to be learned, and there is instruction to be gotten. And not only that, but it's stated, it's full of rasa, full of nectar. Actually, we're encouraged to, in the Srimad Bhagavatam itself, it says, drink the nectar, the refreshing nectar of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So that's directly stated in the Bhagavatam itself. So it's, ideally, it should be something one is spontaneously attracted to do. It's to try to force someone to do it, maybe that isn't the right approach. But it's so attractive. I think if one just gives it a little bit of a chance, you become attracted to it. It'll become something that you look forward to each and every day, to taste some of the nectar of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the deathless nectar of its teachings.
Yes, Prabhu. And clearly, as you mentioned, Srila Prabhupada said the purpose of the temples is to create that culture, that environment devotees feel inspired to indulge in the Bhaktivedanta purports. Prabhu, I have 2 quick questions. One is, many books, and nowadays we have many books. Many of Srila Prabhupada's disciples have written several books as well. In the context of all the books that are available, what do you think is the place of Srila Prabhupada's books within ISKCON?
Well, I think they occupy the paramount position, the supreme position. For anyone who is serious about their life in ISKCON, we have on all of our publications Founder Acharya, the founding spiritual master, the Founder Acharya, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. So it's this Sangha, this society was created by Srila Prabhupada, and it should be guided by his instructions and teachings. They shouldn't be replaced. So that's there. If one wants to represent, Srila Prabhupada by taking some position of responsibility in this movement, to be part of its spirit of spreading Krishna consciousness throughout the world. It's an international society. One should be familiar with Srila Prabhupada's teachings, and they are found in his books, which are to be consulted by all of his followers in disciplic succession. Now, that isn't to say that one shouldn't read other books. In addition to reading Srila Prabhupada's books every day, I've also read every day some other books. So it's not that reading other books should be forbidden or discouraged, but people should be members of ISKCON, friends of ISKCON, disciples and grand disciples of Srila Prabhupada, or those who are following his shiksha or instructions. They should feel inspired to dive into his teachings and become inspired about how to live their lives in this Krishna consciousness movement. But other books, of course, can also be read. I read, in addition to Srila Prabhupada's books every day, I read something from some other Acharya's books, whether it's Sanatana Goswami's Brihad Bhagavatamrita, or some of the works of Bhaktivinoda Thakur or other Acharyas. They're also something that can be read, and one can certainly profit from them. But Srila Prabhupada's teachings, his shiksha, is something that's foundational for the International Society for Krishna Consciousness.
And that is definitely a note that we should all put and keep it close to our heart, that Srila Prabhupada's Shiksha is foundational for the society and relevant for one and all who is part of this society. Prabhu, any parting message before we bring this wonderful discussion to a close? Any parting message to the viewers?
If you're not already reading Srila Prabhupada's books every day, try it. Every day, read a little bit from Srila Prabhupada's books. And I think if you make that experiment, you'll find you become attracted, even addicted to doing it.
So let's all develop the addiction for Srila Prabhupada's books inspired by Drutakarma. Prabhu, thank you so very much for your time and for inspiring us to read Srila Prabhupada's books every day. Hare Krishna, yes. Prabhu.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.